So I will give, yes.
What you're proposing here, what the president's proposing here, does not sound like it's in keeping with American tradition when it comes to immigration. The Statue of Liberty says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free." It doesn't say anything about speaking English or being able to be a computer programmer. Aren't you trying to change what it means to be an immigrant coming into this country? If you're telling them you have to speak English, can't people learn how to speak English when they get here?
Well, first of all, right now, it's a requirement that to be naturalized, you have to speak English. So the notion that speaking English wouldn't be a part of our immigration systems would be actually very ahistorical. Secondly, I don't want to get off into a whole thing about history here, but the Statue of Liberty is a symbol of liberty enlightening the world. It's a symbol of American liberty lighting the world. The poem that you're referring to that was added later is not actually part of the original Statue of Liberty, but more fundamentally, the history, but more fundamentally,
you're saying
the
that
history
does not represent.
I'm saying that the notion. I'm saying the notion that I'm saying the notion.
Stephen, I'm sorry.
No,
that sounds
Jim.
like,
let me ask you a question.
That sounds like some national park revisionism.
No, what I'm asking you is
the Statue of Liberty
Jim,
has always
Jim,
been
let me ask you a question.
Of hope to the world.
Jim,
for people to send.
Jim, do you believe
people to this country?
Jim,
and they're not always going to speak English, Stephen.
Jim,
they're not
do you
always
believe
going to be highly skilled? They're not always going to be.
Jim, I appreciate your speech. Jim, I appreciate your speech. So let's talk about this.
It was a modest.
Jim, let's talk about this. In 1970, when we let in 300,000 people a year, was that violating or not violating the Statue of Liberty law of the land? In the 1990s, when it was 500,000 a year, was it violating or not violating the Statue of Liberty law of the land?
Was it violating?
When it was 700,000 a year. No, tell me what years. Tell me what years. Tell me what years meet. Tell me what years meet Jim Acosta's definition of the Statue of Liberty poem law of the land. So you're saying 1 million a year is the Statue of Liberty number. 900,000 violates it, 800,000 violates it.
You're sort of bringing a press one for English philosophy here to immigration, and that's never been what the United States has been about, Stephen.
But your statement's also shockingly ahistorical in another respect, too, which is if you look at the history of immigration, it's actually ebbed and flowed. We've had periods of very large waves, followed by periods of less immigration and more immigration, and during we've had
a period of immigration right now. The president wants to build a wall. You want to bring about a sweeping change to
surely, Jim, you don't actually think that a wall affects green card policy. You couldn't possibly believe that, do you? Actually, the notion that you actually think immigration is at a historic law, the foreign-born population in the United States today, Jim,
staff on Monday talking about how border crossings.
Do you really? I want to be serious, Jim. Do you really at CNN not know the difference between green card policy and illegal immigration?
Sir,
are you really don't know that?
Cuban immigrant. He came to this country in 1962, right before the Cuban Missile Crisis, and obtained a green card. Yes, people who immigrate to this country can eventually. People who
Jim,
immigrate
as a
to this
factual
country
question,
through, not through Ellis Island,
as a factual question,
ways do obtain a green card at some point. They do it through a lot of hard work, and yes, they may learn English as a second language later on in life.
So, but
this whole notion of they could learn, they have to learn English before they get to the United States. Are we just going to bring in people from Great Britain and Australia?
Jim, actually, I have to honestly say, I am shocked at your statement that you think that only people from Great Britain and Australia would know English. It reveals your cosmopolitan bias to a shocking degree that in your mind, this is an amazing moment. This is an amazing moment. That you think only people from Great Britain or Australia would speak English is so insulting to millions of hard-working immigrants who do speak English from all over the world. Jim, have you honestly never met an immigrant from another country who speaks English outside of Great Britain and Australia? Is that your personal experience?
Of course there are people who come
but that's not what you said, and it shows your cosmopolitan bias. And I just want to say,
it sounds like you're trying to engineer the racial and ethnic flow of people into this country.
Jim, that is one of the most outrageous, insulting, ignorant, and foolish things you've ever said, and for you that's still a really the notion that you think that this is a racist bill is so wrong and so insulting. Jim, the reality is that the foreign-born population into our country has quadrupled since 1970. That's a fact. It's been mostly driven by green card policy. Now, this bill allows for immediate nuclear family members to come into the country, much as they would today, and then it adds an additional points-based system. The people who've been hurt the most, the people who've been hurt the most by the policy you're advocating are
What policy am I advocating?
apparently just unfettered, uncontrolled migration. The people who've been hurt the most by the policy.
What you're doing is for
The people who've been hurt the most by the policy that you're. The people who've been hurt the most by the policy you're advocating are immigrant workers and minority workers and African American workers and Hispanic workers.
Targeting
And it
the
has
African
no.
American community. Now you brought it up again. You said you wanted to have a conversation and not target. Is it going to be a target?
This is
now?
what we want to
If you're
do.
Using the African American community, are you going to target? I'm not trying to be funny. But
Right, and I know what you're saying. What you're saying is 100% correct.
Thank you.
We want to help unemployed African Americans in this country and unemployed workers of all backgrounds get jobs. And insinuations like Jim made, trying to ascribe nefarious motives to a compassion immigration measure designed to help newcomers and current arrivals alike, is wrong. And this is a positive, optimistic proposal that says 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now, we want to have an immigration system that takes care of the people who are coming here and the people who are already living here by having standards, by having a real clear requirement that you be able to support yourself financially, by making sure that employers can pay a living wage. That's the right policy for our country, and it's the president's commitment to taking care of American workers. I apologize, Jim, if things got heated, but you did make some pretty rough insinuations. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I'll hand it over to Sarah. I think that went exactly as planned. I think that was what Sarah was hoping would happen. I think that was exactly what we were hoping to have happen. Thank you.
That's the question.
Thanks. Let's go to Glenn.
Two quick questions. First of all, let's have some statistics. There have been a lot of studies out there that don't show a correlation between low-skilled immigration and the loss of jobs for native workers. Cite for me, if you could, one or two studies with specific numbers that prove the correlation between those two things, because your entire policy is based on that. And secondly, I had sources that told me about a month ago that you guys have sort of elbowed infrastructure out of the way to get immigration on the legislative queue. Tell me why this is more important than infrastructure.
Well, the latter statement isn't true. I think the most recent study I would point to is the study from George Borjas that he just did about the Mariel boat lift. And he went back and re-examined and opened up the old data and talked about how it actually did reduce wages for workers who were living there at the time. And Borjas has, of course, done enormous amounts of research on this, as has the Peter Kirsanow on the U.S. Civil Rights Commission, as has Steve Camarada at the Center for Immigration Studies, and so on and so on.
Sciences, engineering, and medicine.
And no recent study said that as much as $300 billion a year may be lost as a result of our current immigration system in terms of folks drawing more public benefits than they're paying in. But let's also use common sense here, folks. At the end of the day, why do special interests want to bring in more low-skilled workers, and why historically...
I'm not asking for common sense. I'm asking for specific.
Well, I think it's very clear,
data.
Glenn, that you're not asking for common sense. But if I could just answer your question, I named the studies, Glenn. Glenn, I named the studies.
I asked you for a statistic. Can you tell me
Glenn,
how many?
Maybe we'll make a carve-out in the bill that says the New York Times can hire all the low-skilled, less-paid workers they want from other countries, and see how you feel then about low-wage substitution. This is a reality that's happening in our country. Maybe it's time we had compassion, Glenn, for American workers. President Trump has met with American workers who've been replaced by foreign workers, and ask them how this has affected their lives. Look at I just told you.
Low-skilled jobs that Americans might otherwise have. Why?
If you look first of all, if you look at the premise, Glenn, of bringing in low-skilled labor, it's based on the idea that there's a labor shortage for lower-skilled jobs. There isn't. The number of people living in the United States in the working ages who aren't working today is at a record high. 1 in 4 Americans, or almost 1 in 4 Americans between the ages of 25 and 54, aren't even employed. For African American workers, their labor force participation rate, who don't have a high school diploma, I guess African American males without a high school diploma, has plummeted some 40 percentage points since the mass wave of unskilled migration began. The reality is that if you just use common sense, and yes, I will use common sense, the reason why some companies want to bring in more unskilled labor is because they know that it drives down wages and reduces labor costs. Our question as a government is, to whom is our duty? our duty is to U.S. citizens and U.S. workers to promote rising wages for them. If low-skilled immigration was an unalloyed good for the economy, then why have we been growing at 1.5% for the last 17 years at a time of unprecedented new low-wage arrivals? It's just the facts speak for themselves. At some point, we're accountable